You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, episode number 126. $5K for actors, $2K for insurance, $2K for food and drink, $9K in the can. We only shot for 12 days. Now that's how you make an independent film. Edward Burns.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to a special episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And today's show is also sponsored by Indie Film Hustle's Filmmaker process. We provide screenwriters with professional services to get their films or series packaged, funded, finished, and distributed. Some of the services we offer are pitch deck creation, film budgets and schedules, domestic and international sales estimates, legal contract templates, and consulting. If you're looking to package a screenplay or project, Filmmaker Process can help. Head over to www.filmmakerprocess.com. Today, I have on the show indie film legend, Edward Burns. Now, Ed blasted onto the scene in his lottery ticket story. That lottery ticket story I talk so much about that filmmakers are always looking for, and they're going to make their film and get picked up and it goes off to make $1 million in their career launches. Well, that's exactly what happened to Edward Burns with his film, his 1995 film, The Brothers McMullen, which he made for about $27,000 on weekends, and he was working as a PA on Entertainment Tonight while he was doing it. And there's just so many stories about how this movie got made, but it got bought by Fox Searchlight and it went on to make $10 million at the box office, which catapulted Ed into stardom like overnight. And he followed up with She's the One with Jennifer Aniston and Cameron Diaz. And he continued to make film after film. And he kept getting bigger and bigger budgets. But what he realized is that he wanted to have more freedom with his art and what he did. So he went back to the Brothers McMullen model, which was low budget, micro budget films. So he made a movie called Newlyweds for $9,000. And he continued to make these low budget $10,000, $20,000 independent films because it allowed him to be more free as a filmmaker. And I really admire that about Ed, because Ed not only became a very popular director and writer, but he became a very popular actor, starring movies like Saving Private Ryan, Steven Spielberg's masterpiece, The Holiday, the Christmas classic, and many, many more. The list goes on and on how many films and TV shows he's been in over the years. And many filmmakers and many guys who get thrown into that kind of world could easily just cash out and coast for the rest of his life and his career, taking acting roles and directing, big things when they came along and so on and so forth. But not Ed, man. He wanted to go back to his indie roots and continues up to this day in his indie roots. And I just was so honored to talk to Ed and have him on the show. We just went, this interview is epic. The first 30 minutes is how he was able to get Brothers McMullen off the ground. There's been so many myths about Brothers McMullen and how it got made and how it got sold. And we actually get the truth straight from the horse's mouth, as they say. And we talk about independent filmmaking, about the micro budget model, his remarkable book, Independent Ed, which chronicles his whole career from Brothers McMullen all the way to his latest films, talking about how he broke them down, how he made them. He really wanted to give back as much as possible. And I got to tell you, that book was an amazing inspiration to me to make my first film, This Is Meg, and understanding that I could go out and make a micro budget film that could go out and make money and could get sold and could get licensed to Hulu and so on. It was his book that really ignited that in me. And if you ever get a chance to get his DVDs of all of these micro budget films that he makes, his director commentaries are gold, absolute gold. And I'm going to put links to all of those films in the show notes. This was an epic conversation, to say the least. And if you're an independent filmmaker trying to make micro budget films, this is the episode for you. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Edward Burns. I'd like to welcome to the show Edward Burns, man. How you doing, Ed?
Alex, man, great to speak to you. As I was telling you earlier, I've been a fan of the podcast for a long time, so it's cool to be on it.
That's humbling and remarkable. When I heard that from your producing partner, Aaron, I was floored that you'd been listening to me. Like I told him, I'm like, sometimes you just sit in a room with a mic and you have no idea who's listening. So that's very humbling. And I've been a fan of yours, man, since Brothers McMullen days. You are one of those lottery ticket stories, those kind of Cinderella stories that you hear about from the 90s, along with Robert and Kevin and Richard Linklater and all those guys that came around. And you came in that crop, man, of, like, I always tell people the 90s was just like such a glorious time to be a filmmaker, because it felt like almost every month or every week almost there was one of these stories that came out. Is that fair to say?
It probably was. I mean, I know for me, it certainly was. Sundance was the launching pad. Sure. Every year, you would see those articles coming out of there. For me, there was a couple of movies. Obviously Rodriguez's El Mariachi, but I think before that, Nick Gomez had a movie called Laws of Gravity. It was made for $23,000, and that was really a huge influence on me. When I could see, like, oh wait, you can make a feature film for $20,000 all in. And it can then get picked up for distribution, because really prior to that, what you would hear when you were in film school, and I'm in film school in like 89, 90, 91, is that the way in is to make a short film. Yeah. And I remember there used to be something called, the IFP used to run something called the Independent Feature Film Market that they held down at the Angelica Theater in the Village. And that's where, if you could get your short film in there, all of the buyers and managers and agents, the whole like New York indie film scene would be there. And that was the launching pad. And I can remember I went there with my first short film, and there were short films that had like big budgets, that, really high end production value. And I knew I would never be able to raise enough money to compete with that,
Right.
Then when Laws of Gravity comes out, The Living End, the Greg Araki movie came out.
Oh, that's right. And the one movie that always gets, he doesn't get the credit that he deserves, Robert Townsend, Hollywood Shuffle.
Oh, without a doubt. But that one was a little bit more expensive.
It was still like, he put it on his credit cards though. And
okay. Yeah.
It was Robert, it was 86, 87. And he was in LA, and he made it for like, it was in the 20 to 75 range.
Oh, really?
Okay. It wasn't crazy. He put it on credit cards. He was the first filmmaker that I heard of that put it on his credit cards, because I was working at a video store back in the late 80s, early 90s. So I remember Hollywood Shuffle, and it was just.
And what year is that? I feel like that kind of.
87.
It's 87. Okay. Yeah. So that's a little earlier.
It's right before, it's before Sex Lies hits, which was $1 million, but that before he launched the Sundance and before Laws of Gravity and Mariachi and Clerks and all that run. But he was one of the first to do it, but he doesn't get he's never in the same conversations. And I always make it a point to point out how instrumental Robert Townsend was.
Interesting. Yeah. So when would Metropolitan have been? Metropolitan is probably.
But that's Woody, right?
What's that?
Which one's Metropolitan?
That's the Whit Stillman movie. That was another one.
That's right. That's right. That was around. Oh God, that was around that time. But also, the ones that got the most attention. I mean, obviously Robert got the biggest. I mean, Robert Rodriguez got the biggest thing with Mariachi. Yeah. That's still a mythical. In the halls of independent film, people still talk about El Mariachi as this mythical thing. And in the same breath with Clerks and Brothers McMullen, Slacker as well. So Slacker's probably 2 years before me. That was another big one because I think Rick made that for maybe in that 25 to 50 range. Right. And I just had Scott Mosier on the show. And Scott was telling me, I'm like, Scott, who was the thing? He's like, oh, it's Slacker. Slacker was the blueprint. Cause I'm like, you guys didn't have a blueprint really. It was like
before that though, Long Island's own Hal Hartley.
Yes.
The guy who I feel like, because he did 3 in the early 90s, he did, it was The Unbelievable Truth, Simple Men, and I forget the third, but those were all done, in that under $100,000 budget range. And the thing that was interesting, back to sort of the whole, short film versus a feature, was seeing that every year, all of a sudden, you had Hal Hartley, then you mentioned Rodriguez, you had
don't forget Jim Jarmusch.
But that's prior,
that's.
He's more in the Spike Lee.
She's got to have it. Yeah, she's got to have it time, right?
Those guys came up mid 80s. This is more that early 90s micro budget that then got distribution. And that was really, I think, the thing that changed things, because it wasn't just make a short as a calling card to get an agent to hopefully make a Hollywood feature.
Right.
You could make it more like an indie rock band who was like, hey, we're going to just put out our own thing. And this thing has its own value. We're not trying to parlay this into a gig to work with the studio. We're going to create something new here that then we can build upon. So that is really what changed, I think, in the early 90s. If you look at Kevin Smith, granted, Clerks is a micro budget movie, but he basically stays within that milieu. I know I did as well. Hal Hartley is another guy who did. Some guys or gals chose to sort of take that and turn it into sort of a bigger, sort of more studio type of filmmaking career. Mm-hmm. But at that time, I think that's what folks were trying to do. Like, treat it more like you're in a band. And it's like, all right, we make gritty sort of punk rock albums, and that's what we want to continue to do.
So when you were coming up, your story also is also quite mythical about the whole being a PA and working at ET. Can you tell everybody, because a lot of people listening might not know the story of actually how you got, before we get how you got into Sundance, how did you get Brothers McMullen off the ground? What made you think that you can make it? It's nuts. It's like, now you look at it and you're like, oh, well, everyone could do that. But back then there's no internet. There was no knowledge about this really. So how did you do it, man?
It's a crazy long story, and you just tell me to switch gears when you're so,
Sure.
I remember, because it's like I make the film 28 years ago when I start when I'm 24, I think. Mm-hmm. So, coming out of film school, like you said, I'm a production assistant at a television show in New York, which basically my job was driving the van and setting up the lights. That's the extent of what I did. So I had plenty of time. It was a job that required no mental focus at all. So I spent all my time writing screenplays. At the time, one of the guys we forgot to mention is Tarantino in Reservoir Dogs.
Well, there's that guy.
So I see Reservoir Dogs and I'm like, okay, that is what I need to write. So I probably write in my 4 years or 3.5 years out of film school, 5 feature-length scripts. 3 of them are Reservoir Dog ripoffs. I am pouring through the trades every day, trying to find or identify the agents or managers who sign first-time screenwriters. So that's who I'm sending all of my scripts to.
Smart.
All right. And every day, my dad told me something. He's like, look, there's absolutely another filmmaker out there who is outworking you. So you need to make sure every day you do one little thing to chip away at the brick wall that separates you from the dream. So if that meant, I'm going to write a scene in my script, or I'm going to write another letter to an agent, or I'm going to send my short film into another film festival, every day I made sure I did one little thing. So I write all these scripts, I send them out, I get nothing but rejection letters back. And I come to the conclusion, and this has happened to me a couple of times in my career, where I kind of recognize, well, maybe I'm just not that good. Maybe it isn't that they they can't recognize what a talent I am. Right. Maybe I'm just actually not talented. Right. Maybe I need to go back to school and learn a little bit more. Right. And at the time, I see an ad for the Robert McKee story structure class. Mm-hmm. Okay? So a lot of people might poo-poo that. No, traditional Hollywood structure is BS. 3 acts, don't pay any attention to that. For me, it was incredible. I go there, and you learn a lot of this stuff in your screenwriting 101 stuff in film school. But again, a lot of it you forget, or if you want to be like a cool arty kind of kid, you're dismissive of that stuff. Mm-hmm. At this point, after 5 rejected screenplays, I am no longer thinking I'm hot shit. I am not dismissive of anything. I recognize I need to learn. Right. So I take the class, and a couple of things that he said that really struck a chord with me. One was, what is your favorite genre of film? What do you love to watch? That is the next screenplay that you should be writing. You like horror, write a horror script. You like, action, do that. And at the time, I was like a massive Truffaut and Woody Allen fan. That's all I was doing. It was all I was watching. So I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Basically, relationship, comedy, drama, a little bit of an ensemble. I'd look at those Woody Allen films and I'd be like, okay, that's a oneer. For people, everyone listening to you, I think knows what a oneer is, but one shot without a cut that lasts almost 2 minutes of 2 people walking down a street in Manhattan talking about their relationships. Okay, I know from my film school days, that's about as easy as you can do with no money. That's as easy a scene as you can pull off compared to shooting, let's say, an interior scene in a crowded restaurant where I'm going to need to hire extras and whatever. Mm-hmm. So as I sit down, and when I leave McKee, I'm like, all right, that's what I'm going to do. I know that's the genre that I want to play in. I decided to make an ensemble because I knew from my student films that when you're not paying your actors, there's no guarantee that any of them are ever going to show up. Especially in New York, everybody's got other jobs. They're waiting tables. They're working in a gym. You would have people just bail on you in the middle of a shoot. So I said, if I have an ensemble and I cast myself and my girlfriend opposite me, I know that even if this thing blows up, I have a short film. And that's why, and it's a crazy way to write a screenplay, but I wrote it as 4 sort of different movies. The first movie was the 3, and then I listed all the locations that I knew I could get for free. So I knew I could get my parents' house. So that was location number 1. Then I knew every street corner and sidewalk and public park in New York City. I knew from my working in news days. You did not, first of all, there was no cost to shoot there, and you would never be bothered. No cop would ever ask you, certainly in the early 90s in New York, if you had a permit to shoot. Not when New York was still a little gritty then. They could care less about 3 students out with a camera. Right. So I was like, so that's what the movie will be. I'll have these 3 brothers, and the one movie is the movie that takes place in their house. And then they'll each have a girlfriend in Manhattan, and those will be my other 3 short films. So I kept thinking if it didn't work out, I could have a 25-minute movie, 50-minute movie, 75-minute movie, or a feature.
So you actually backed into this film with disaster in mind.
Totally. Reverse engineered the whole thing.
It's amazing. That's remarkable. I had never heard that part of the myth, if you will.
So that's kind of how I laid out the script.
All right.
And so then there was an article in the IFP's old magazine, The Independent, and they did an article on Living End, Laws of Gravity, and I forget maybe one of the Hal Hartley movies. And they basically broke down those budgets.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And they were, like I said earlier, one was 23, one was 28, one was like 35. And I looked at that and I said, based on my experiences with my student films, I was like, I think I can pull this McMullen script off for about $25,000. I think I can get it in the can for 25. So my old man, again, my dad was a cop in New York. I am a working class kid, grew up with no money, no connections in the business. We knew a lawyer. And my dad convinced this guy to put together a limited partnership. And we were going to sell $5,000 shares to get the 25 grand. He knew a guy who works on Wall Street. That guy gave him $5,000, and that's all we raised. Yeah, so basically, we raised $5,000. I convinced my dad to give me about another $4,000, and I basically tell him and this guy, with the $9,000, let me just go and shoot together sort of a sizzle reel, a trailer, and we'll use that to raise more money. But I knew that I was going to try and shoot the entire film for $9,000. That was my goal. So I set out, I put an ad in Backstage Magazine that basically says, no budget indie, non-union, no pay, but we'll feed you. It's New York City, so I probably got 2,500 headshots. Mm-hmm. Put through all the headshots. And then there's some, great stories about, how I was able to get some of these actors. But, the part of Molly, the older brother's wife, probably auditioned 15, 20 actresses. And I'm thinking to myself, the script is terrible because the scenes that these young actresses were reading just weren't playing. And I'm sitting behind the camera shooting her audition. And I'm like, oh, my God, like, this kid is good. Wow, maybe these scenes aren't so terrible. So Connie ends up being cast in the movie. And throughout the production, Connie was kind of like our, she was our ringer. We just knew, like, okay, she's like really the super talented one here. When you're acting opposite her, you better bring your A game. So we get Connie in the movie. The other actors are all, and like Connie, nobody had ever been on a set before. Nobody had ever been in front of a camera before. And I set out to go make this film. We probably shot about 6 days over the course of maybe 3 weeks. And then I kind of run out of money. But I don't let the cast know that. And what I then do, we ended up shooting 12 days over the course of 8 months. And what I would do is I would save up some money from work. I'd hit my dad up for a little bit of money. The camera guy I was working with, Dick Fisher, would say, hey, look, I'm not working this Saturday and Sunday. I have the camera. A buddy of mine is available to do sound. Who can you get from the cast that's available? And, I would then go and say, all right, Jack and Mike are available. Let me see what scenes are still not shot. Or and then the other crazy thing I did was, we shot 16 millimeter.
Right.
We couldn't afford to buy any new cans of film. So
short ends.
Short ends. Well,
and 16, not even super 16, but 16 short ends.
Yeah. You get like leftover stuff from industrials. So it was cheaper for me to re-enroll in Hunter College for one class, which I think was probably, I don't know at the time, probably $300. So I can get a student ID, because for the short ends with your student ID, it was something like 25% off or something like that. So I re-enroll in school in order to get the cheaper price on the short ends. But then, of course, when we can't afford to develop anything until we're done shooting. So 8 months after we get these 12 days done, we develop stuff. And then, from short ends, a lot of times some of that film has already been exposed. So, it made the editing a little bit easier when you knew, like, okay, well, we're cutting that scene because we just don't have that scene.
So wait a minute. So you had 8 months that you had a bunch of film reels in your apartment.
After those first 6 days, we're just, Dick says, hey, I'm free on this day. I say, great. I go buy some film stock.
Right.
I call the actors. I come up with the scenes. We go shoot those 2 days. And then it's like, all right, when are we going to shoot again? I have no idea.
But so how long were you with the movie in the can before you got it developed?
All right. So once we finished shooting and we had everything at that point, then I go to the Duart Film Labs. And there was a great guy who ran the place named Dick Young and Bob Smith. Those were the two guys who ran it. And to their credit, they were real supporters of indie film and young folks in New York trying to make it happen. So, my dad went down with me there and explained to them, hey, I'll vouch for Eddie, but, he's got this film. Here's all the film. We'd love to get it processed. Can't pay for it all now, but if you can defer those costs, we'll slowly pay it off over time. And they were generous enough to do it.
So almost like layaway.
Yeah.
Their payment plan for development. That world does not exist now. You have to find some very special people.
I mean, could you imagine though, trying to shoot an indie film on 16 millimeter today on short ends? Like that's why for me, and I've heard you talk about it as well, it is so exciting right now if you're a young indie filmmaker that you can pick up this friggin' thing, your phone, and go and make a feature that's going to look 100 times better than Brothers McMullen looked. Oh. You know what I mean? Hands down.
The lenses you can get, the cameras you get. I mean, I shot a whole feature on a little pocket camera and just got vintage lenses and just went out and shot a movie in 4 days. And it looks stunning. Projected at the Chinese theater on a 2K upres. Stunning. Most beautiful thing I've ever shot. And I've shot things with much bigger budgets. And it was just this little 1080p camera. It was just gorgeous. So, and now there's like 4 and 6K cameras and like the little pockets. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Yeah. So you edit, so you get everything developed on the layaway. It's a fucking great story. On layaway. Then you're editing it. I'm assuming this is 95.
So it gets even crazier. So we transferred the film to beta because I work at Entertainment Tonight.
Beta SP, of course.
And they cut the show on beta. So what me and Dick would do is at the end of the night, like if we had a movie premiere, let's say, because we covered those kind of things, we were the last people in the office. We'd leave the side door of the office open when we left, go next door to the Mayflower Hotel, have a drink, come back into the building at midnight, and then edit till 5 a.m. using their editing bays.
Without permission. So always ask for forgiveness, never for permission.
Exactly.
So, all right. So you transfer everything to beta because I used to cut on tape as well on beta SP. Is there a film print of this that's not a transfer from video? Did you ever go back to the neg on anything?
We did, yeah.
Eventually did. Okay. But at first you just cut together a video edit of that. And did you color grade? You didn't color grade that. No, there's no color grade. Whatever it was, it was.
Whatever it was. No sound mix, no nothing. Other than, we basically, at the time, we just borrowed all of this traditional Irish folk music from this musician named Seamus Egan. And I'll tell you the story of like the great ending that happened for Seamus. But at the time, I couldn't afford a composer. And I thought, all right, we'll just use needle drops from this guy. And he was a friend of a friend of a friend. So I knew that I could get to him eventually. But at the time, I was like, I need music for the film. Right. I have no idea what's going to happen with this movie. And really, when I make the film, certainly you have the dream that maybe it'll get picked up for distribution. But as I said earlier, for 5 years, I'm sending out my scripts. I can't get even a phone call back from an agent. I'm hoping the film will be something of a calling card and that maybe nothing else will go to a festival, someone will see it, and I'll get an agent. So we cut the film, transfer it to VHS. At the time, it's 2 hours long. We're both exhausted. I mean, I know it's still a rough cut, but, it's your first film. It's your baby. I don't know what scenes to cut. So I knock off a bunch of, VHS copies of it. And then I start the process of doing the same thing. I'm pouring through the trades. Who are the agents who are signing first-time filmmakers? What are the film festivals? What are the production companies and the distribution companies? Send it out everywhere, film festivals, a year's worth of rejections. And then the famous story is the Redford Sundance story.
Right.
So, I'm working at Entertainment Tonight. Redford is there to do press for, I believe it was Quiz Show. I know that, obviously Redford, Sundance, I take one of these rough cuts with me. And I have my little, 30-second spiel rehearsed so that when he gets up with his PR person, and usually you shoot these junkets in a big hotel. So I know he's going to go out the main room. I'll go out the second bedroom, cut him off as he's getting into the elevator, give him the spiel, hand him the tape, and we'll see what happens. So that's exactly what I do. And he listens to me and he says, "Oh, okay,
now
great.
Back to the show.
We'll have someone take a look at it." And he hands it to his PR person, and the elevator doors close, and that's it. And I think, I guess I was kind of hoping he would want me to jump in the elevator and hear more about it. Didn't happen.
and just take the private plane to his house, and then all that stuff. Of course.
And we're on our way. Doesn't work that way, but 2 months later, I'm at work, and I get a phone call from Jeff Gilmore, who was the programmer at Sundance at the time. And Jeff says, "Hey, Eddie, hey, Ed, we got this movie here. It says it's a rough cut. Just want to know if you finished it." I lie. I say, "Yes, of course I did." He says, "So it says a rough cut, 2 hours. What's the running time now?" I say 95 minutes because, the Truffaut films, the Woody Allen films are all roughly, under 100 minutes. So that's our job. And he says, "Well, what scenes did you cut?" And by this point now, the movie's a year old. So I've kind of seen it and I'm less in love with it. So there's a handful of scenes I know I want to cut. And then I just riff and name some other scenes. And he says, "You know what? Actually, that sounds pretty good. All right, we'll be in touch." 2 weeks later, they call up and they say, "You're in." So now that's probably September.
So hold on a second. When you get that call, what is that? I mean, like,
I'm in the office and all of the guys that I work with, the crew guys, they've all worked on the movie with me. Like they've all done sound for me.
Right.
So they they know, what we're doing with the editing machines. So they're all giving me high fives and everybody's cheering and like, "I can't believe it. Holy shit.
Our little Eddie's, he made good. He's gonna go to the show.
That's exactly what it was like. So now though, I have to raise another $25,000 at a minimum to finish the film, because it's cut on beta. So I got to go back to the negative, recut it,
right? Because
and blow it up to 35. And I've never done that before. I don't know how to do that. My student films that I made, I cut myself on a little like Moviola slicer. Mm-hmm. We had to sync up your mag sound to your picture and tape it together. I was like, I can't do that for a 95-minute long movie. So I can't remember exactly how, but I'm put in touch with Ted Hope and James Seamus at Good Machine. Mm-hmm. And those are the guys who really, quite honestly, at that time, took me under their wing. They came on as producers, and they helped me. Not only they taught me how to finish a film, but Ted was really invaluable in the editing room with me. I knew 20 minutes I could cut out of the movie like that. But that last 10 was tough. And he gave me 2 great bits of advice. He goes, "Look, I'm telling you, you don't need the scene. And if the scene is so great, use it in another one of your films." Needless to say, the scene is never so good that you end up revisiting it. Or at least it wasn't in that case. The other thing he said is, how many times have you walked out of a movie and said, "That was a pretty good movie, but that was that 20 minutes in the middle. It was a little, kind of dragged there." Because nobody ever walks out of the theater and says, "God, it was a really good movie, but it was too short." He's like, "I'm telling you, let's get this thing down to 95. You got a nice breezy comedy here, puts a smile on your face, like get people in and out. And I'm telling you, they're going to enjoy it." And it was great advice. And that's what we did. And the interesting thing was, because we were up against the deadline for Sundance, and I might have the dates exactly wrong. It's 26 years ago, but I had to fly to Sundance for the start of the festival. And I don't know if they still do it, but they would have like a filmmaker orientation. And there were things you did with all the filmmakers those first couple of days. And our first screening is until 4 days after that. Ted has to stay in New York because he has to wait for the blow up to happen. So the blow up, Ted grabs it that day, goes to the airport, gets on the plane, flies to Sundance. We screen the next morning at the Egyptian. So I never even get to see the film projected until I first screening at Sundance.
Jesus Christ! And then as the legend goes, then there's was there a bidding war for it? How'd that go?
There was not a bidding war. Tom Rothman at Fox Searchlight, which was a brand new company. McMullen was the first movie they ever released. He was at the first screening. And again, the funny thing is, so they tell us, and maybe it was because of the Redford thing, there were 18 movies in and we were the 19th. So even on my flight to Park City, there was an article listing all the movies in competition. We weren't even mentioned. So we were a little bit of the also ran. So you can imagine that.
That feeling, just are we there? Yeah. It's because you just can't pick up Bob and call Bob at this point.
Yeah. You can't even pick up a phone and do anything like that, right? Right. So anyhow, so we had a good crowd at the festival. Again, to my memory, we did not have many buyers there other than Searchlight. And at that screening, it's pretty great. It's the reaction was great. Got to meet a lot of people and a bunch of agents and managers. And afterwards, they're giving you their business cards. And got to come out to play. We got to do lunch and all that. But, Rothman was there. And that night, over dinner, before even our second screening, we sold the movie to Searchlight.
And if you mind me asking, what was the final sales for it?
We sold it for $250.
Oh, jeez. You must have been ecstatic.
We were through the roof. I mean, we could not believe it.
Jesus.
And we had some box office bumps built into that that would have gotten us to $500,000 if the movie basically doubled Clerks' domestic box office. And I think Clerks at the time did 1.2 or something like that. Yeah. So the idea that the movie would do $2 million, they thought was an absurd notion. It'll never get there.
I mean, yeah, there's no stars in it. It's, it was a $27,000 movie. Yeah,
none of the indie movies did. None of those little ones that we talked about, they would do 400, 500, 600.
Yeah, Mariachi, I think. Mariachi with Columbia Pictures pushing it and put $1 million in remastering it. Still only pulled in a couple mil, 2 or 3 mil.
Really?
Theatrically, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't it was a blockbuster. Yeah, I mean, but yours was.
Yeah, so then we end up making, it ends up doing $10 million.
Jesus.
Which is just nuts. But I was talking about the guys at Good Machine, and the other great bit of advice was from James Seamus. And he was like, look, Eddie, when you're at the festival, who knows if we're going to sell the movie? But I'm telling you, those 10 days, you will never be hotter. There's a feeding frenzy that happens at the festival, and and we see it every year. These movies that sell for a ton of money at the festival that whether they warrant or not, who cares? Filmmakers are getting paid. That's a good thing. But he's like, you better have another screenplay in your hand, because they will ask you, what do you want to do next? And if you could hand them a script and say, I'm doing this next, you'll get that thing greenlit in a hurry. So I quickly wrote basically what I thought was a funnier version of Brothers McMullen, because we didn't really think we would sell Brothers McMullen.
No.
So that movie was She's the One. And, Rothman basically said what Seamus said he was going to say. What do you want to do next? I said, I want to do this. Here's the script for She's the One. And within a week, that was greenlit. So, I go out to LA for the first time in my life as a guy who sold a movie to Fox Searchlight, and now I've got my second film greenlit with a $3 million budget.
And that is the lottery ticket. That is absolutely the lottery ticket. And I constantly, if you've heard the podcast, I've talked about it so many times that filmmakers think that's the plan. I'm like, no, dude, that is not the plan. Eddie, he did not plan. You didn't plan any of this. You were just like, dude, if I get an agent out of this, I'll be ecstatic.
No, my producing partner, Aaron Lubin, who you got to talk to, he talks about it as the bullseye. When we're making our micro budget movies, right. We always talk about the bullseye is not a business plan.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just because, the big sick for example, a more recent movie that went on to do really great business as an indie film work, doesn't mean, your film, my film, anyone's film is going to do that business. Like, that is the bullseye. You've got to come up with, that's why I love your book when you talk about identifying the niche audience that you've got to find and really thinking about. Back then, you did not need to think about the audience in the same way because there were so few indie movies being made. I mean, there were hundreds, but it's not like today.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. No, now there's hundreds a day.
Yeah.
it's insane. Trust me, I know. I talk to these guys every day. I talk to filmmakers all the time, and I'm seeing it because the good news is anyone can make a feature film. The bad news is anyone can make a feature film. Yep. It's there's a gluttony of product and that's.
And I've spoken at film schools and film classes over the years, and people bring that up. And go, why should you? Are there too many films? And is it now that there's no barrier to entry? I'm like, hey. What's the difference? Now it's the equivalent of a kid who can pick up an acoustic guitar and just start writing songs,
right?
And he can throw them onto his, however you would, on your garage band on your laptop. What's the harm in that? Like, you can make a movie for a couple of $1,000 now. Why discourage anybody from doing that? Because what may end up happening is someone is going to create that movie that is the equivalent to Bob Dylan kind of reinventing sort of, folk music or rock and roll in the mid-'60s. There will be a version of the Ramones that come from the indie film scene from someone who kind of just was like, hey, I only got $5,000. I'm going to make this little movie.
And I think the best advice I've ever heard about that, because, you're right. You're absolutely right. But it's about, finding that voice, that thing that makes you special. Like Brothers McMullen was spawned from you, dude. Like that's just that's definitely something in your wheelhouse from your personal experience and meant something to you. Like I can't write Brothers McMullen. I would write it based on stuff I've seen. It's not something I experienced. But like my last movie I shot, Ego and Desire, which is about filmmakers trying to sell their movie at Sundance, I can talk about that very clearly. And I can talk about the pain and the suffering of filmmakers because that is something that's really, in my perspective, that's my voice. And that's what filmmakers, I think today, they're like, oh, I'm going to make a Brothers McMullen, or I'm going to make a Mariachi, or I'm going to make a Reservoir Dogs. I'm like, no, man, you failed from the moment you started. You got to do something that is really true to your own voice, because that's the only kind of secret sauce we've got, right? Yeah. To stand out.
No, that's absolutely true. And, I've told people like this, as you said, I am one of the lucky ones, right? I got the lottery ticket, and it is still after 25 years, and it was hard after 3 years. Once my third movie tanked at the box office, it's back to pushing that giant boulder up the hill. It has never gotten easier. And the only reason to stick with it is because you don't have a choice. Is because you love this thing so much, you have to do it. Like if you want to do it for all the other reasons, you think it's a cool gig, you want to be famous, you want to make a pile of dough, whatever those other reasons are, forget about it. It is too hard. It is too filled with disappointment and constant rejection that, if you're not in it because you have no choice, the movie gods have called you and they said, hey, man, this is what you're doing. Like it or you're in it no matter what. That's the deal.
No, dude, listen, I've tried to quit this crazy a bunch of times and I can't, man. I can't. I've tried. I've stepped out a bit for maybe a few years, but my foot was always back in it. I've literally tried to quit it. It's like a bad drug, man. Like you can't quit it because it's just something that it's inside of you. It's like you can't not be an artist. It's so hard.
I look at all the films I've made, and I've made a couple that, really just like they didn't work in any way, right? Critics didn't like them, couldn't sell them. When we finally sold them, it was one of those terrible deals you speak about in your book, the no advanced partnership with the shady distribution company.
Does he have a cigar? And he's like, hey, kid, just give me a poster.
But here's the thing. While making every one of those films, I had a blast. Like you're on set working with these actors, watching them bring your words to life. And on every single film I've done, I've met someone or worked with someone who has become either a lifelong friend or a lifelong filmmaking partner. My director of photography, a guy named Will Rexer, he and I are, absolute best friends. The first film we did together is a movie you probably never even heard of called Looking for Kitty. We did on a lark because we wanted to shoot on that new Panasonic with the oscillating glass filter that you would put on the front.
Which one did you, not the Panasonic DVX? Did you shoot it on?
Yeah, that one.
No, you shot it on the DVX, so you got the adapter. So you got the adapter to put it. Oh yeah, I've shot my first short on the DVX. I edited it on Final Cut Pro 4.
And at the time, John Sloss had a company. What the hell are they called? But they were doing a bunch of movies with that camera. I think it was a movie with Katie Holmes.
Yeah, the Pieces of April.
Pieces of April. That was sort of the biggest success of those. But that was shot on that camera, and they were doing these movies for $250,000. They got a special agreement with the unions, so you can make a union film for $250,000 with that camera as long as you abided by certain things. So I heard that. I was like, I'm all in. Let's do it. And we quickly wrote a script, and we thought we'll just hire our friends. We'll kind of improvise it. And the movie it really just didn't work. But the great thing is, that's how I met Will. So, even though it's tough and it's brutal and filled with disappointment, it's always kind of fun.
No, that's what this whole journey is about, man. It's about those relationships. It's about those experiences. And I think a lot of filmmakers make that big mistake of the end game. Like what is the end game? Is it when the movie's finished? Is it when it gets sold? Is it when it gets to a festival? Like, what is the moment where the end happens? And if you're only looking for the end, you're going to be disappointed constantly. But if you're enjoying the ride, then that's a career. That's a life, because and that's something that I so admire about you and your career, is that you seem to be just having a good time making these movies.
Story connected to that, and that thing you're speaking about, the journey. Aaron and I, we made this movie in 2012, Fitzgerald's Family Christmas.
Yeah.
Right? And what we did with that was the idea. It's kind of a long story, but I acted in this movie with Tyler Perry, who obviously very successful. And
he's doing okay. He's doing okay.
He's doing all right. He says to me, hey man, he's like, those first two movies you made, they were so successful. And then you never go back and do anything about Irish families again? What? Because you got to super serve your niche, even to your point. He's like, I guarantee you the people that love those two movies would love another sort of Irish family movie from you. And then, we can talk further, like, think about an evergreen title, Christmas movie. That's something that every year you can kind of hopefully resell. So I kind of had this idea, and I had just made two other micro budget movies. I made a movie called Nice Guy Johnny for, in the can for $25,000. That's a good story about why I made that movie. Then we made a movie on the Canon 5D, Newlyweds. Got it in the can for $9,000. So through those two films, speaking of movies that were kind of successful in the micro budget world, but my casts were great, and I found all these great young new actors in New York. So I was like, all right, so Fitzgerald's, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my new family of cast members and marry them to my old family of cast members that I worked with, Connie Britton, Mike McGlone, the woman who plays the mom, Anita Gillette. And so it was sort of like, all right, we'll bring the whole family of all of our actors together and make this movie. So we make the movie for $250,000 all in. And I forget what festival we're trying to get into. We don't get in. Aaron and I are devastated. And now we're waiting for Toronto. Everything is hanging on. If we get into Toronto, it's a whole new world for us. Like, to get back to that level of a prestigious festival, we get into Toronto. We're high-fiving, we think it's going to be great. We go to Toronto. Our screenings are great. But what doesn't happen is, we don't sell the movie for millions of dollars. We are not the McMullen story of Toronto. We're another one of the movies that played at a big festival. And as we're getting on the plane to fly home to New York, I was like, you remember the endless weeks of anticipation leading up to, did we hear from Toronto? Did we get in? Yeah, we went. I was like, anything different today? than on that last day when we wrapped? Nothing. Not a single thing is different. So why do we get obsessed with the idea of, getting into these festivals? It's great and it's fun, but really at the end of the day, the filmmaking experience was a blast. We worked with all of our friends. The outcome really, and I know people say, oh, that's bullshit. I don't believe that you don't look at your reviews or care about the box office. I'm telling you, after 26 years, it's nice when the good stuff comes, but we really don't. It's like, we just know, hey, whatever happens, good or bad, another 18 months from now, we'll have another script done and we'll figure out how to make, we'll try and get $6 million to do it. If we can't do that, we'll figure out the, $200,000 version of the movie.
And that's only someone who's got a couple of grays in their beards that can say things like that. Trust me, I've got a couple myself.
Yeah, I see it.
So it's exactly, the gray beards. But the thing is but when you're 20, you don't grasp that yet when you're young. You just don't grasp it because you just haven't been down the road yet. So I hope people who are in their 20s are listening to these two old farts talking. I don't mean to speak for you, sir, but this old fart.
Pretty good. I'm an old fart.
Yeah, so these two old farts talking about the olden days. But there's a reason why. What is it? There's a saying, in my wife's Colombian, and she has a saying, a Spanish saying that says, the devil is more of the devil, not because he's the devil, but just because he's just been around for a long time. And it's something like that translates into that. And it's so true. It's like, you just know because you've just been around long. Yeah. Now, I have to ask you though, when you jump from McMullen to She's the One, that's a slight budget difference. And also a slight cast difference as far as the prestige of the actors you were dealing with. Because I know Cameron Diaz was in it. And obviously, and Jennifer Aniston was in it. Jen was just starting, Friends was still a thing at that point, right? Or not yet?
So yeah, it's funny. Like, nobody was a star yet. So Jennifer had, I think it was after the first season of Friends.
Yeah.
So, she's an actress on a sitcom. And granted, the sitcom's very successful, but it isn't like
Friends.
Whoever would have been the big, female movie star at that time.
Right.
And she came in and auditioned and was great. And, and just crushed the part. Cameron was in The Mask at that time. So again, no one, Cameron Diaz wasn't a household name by any stretch.
She's the girl from The Mask. Right.
She's the girl from The Mask. A couple of years later, Something About Mary, different deal.
Right.
But, it's interesting, like two actors who, an actress who kind of was the runner-up to Jennifer's part and the actress who was sort of my second choice for Cameron's part, we end up casting in the movie. And that was Leslie Mann and Amanda Peet, who were also in that movie. So the heavy hitter that we had at the time, like the actor to be intimidated by as a really first time director, was John Mahoney.
Yeah.
And I knew John Mahoney from 8 Men Out and Moonstruck.
Yeah, he's a legend. So how do you so as a quote unquote first time filmmaker, like in a professional environment, how do you handle dealing with obviously you didn't have any giant movie stars that you were dealing with. You had professional actors, like seasoned professional actors. How was that adjustment from no money over 12 months with short ends to now on a $3 million budget and a little bit more breathing room?
I'd say two things. One, the adjustment to working with the actors, I would say really wasn't much of an adjustment because nobody had a ton of experience. We were all the same age. We're all just kids in our 20s doing it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was working with like Nick Nolte and, like a bunch of seasoned vets. Mm-hmm. We're all like a bunch of kids making an indie movie in New York. So it was like, we just hanging out and became friends. So there was no real intimidation factor on set with the actors. Where I was truly intimidated was like walking onto set day one. We had a scene at the airport at JFK. We got half the terminal closed.
Jesus.
I show up, there's 150 people there that are my crew. Now, granted, I've met my department heads. We've been through pre-production together. I have good relationships with them. But when you, step onto the set and 150 people look at you and you're 27 years old and they're like, all right, what's first up? And you're like, Okay.
Here we go. When the dolly grip has shot probably 70 or 80 features, and they're looking, and I had to believe when you walked in at 27, you know that some of these crew guys were like, this son of a bitch. How did this guy get this? And did you get that vibe on some of this stuff?
Definitely. There was probably some of that, but it's funny you mentioned the dolly grip. It was a tough old guy named Huff.
Of course, his name was Huff.
He didn't say 2 words to me for about the first 2 weeks, but eventually, I think I won him over.
You broke him down. I've had when I was that young, directing on big sets, doing my commercials and stuff. The same thing, man. You would walk in, and these guys are just like, who's this? Yeah. Like, they have to smell you for the first half day before does this guy even know what he's doing?
But the fun thing from that is there was a PA on that film named Stuart Nicolai, and I'm 27 at the time. He's probably 23. It's his first gig in the film business out of college, and he works in the location department.
Right.
Now he's been my main location scout on. I did a TV show a couple of years ago called Public Morals. He did the TV show we're doing now, Bridge and Tunnel. So, again, back to the relationships thing. He's a PA who's my age. We become friends. I ended up, he worked on Sidewalks of New York. So over time, as he kind of moved up the rung, he then became sort of my locations guy. So,
and you never know who you're going to meet along the way. Look at that, like the PA guy. I was talking to somebody the other day. There's like the PA on. No, it was Scott. Scott Mosier was saying the PA on Mallrats ended up getting him the job, or introducing him to the job that got him the Grinch, when he just directed the Grinch, the animated feature. And it was just because of that relationship. He was just cool, and they stuck together. But if he would have been a dick to him back then, that's it. There's no game. Now, the one thing out of all those contemporaries that you had in that time period in the 90s, I think, and remind me if I'm wrong, you're the only one that became also a full-fledged actor as well. Was there? I know Tarantino pops in and out, but you go off and act alone. Yeah. And don't direct everything you act in. So you were one of those guys. So you have a unique perspective on this, because after She's the One, you worked on another little independent film called Saving Private Ryan with an unknown director, Mr. Spielberg at the time. Dude, what was that like, man? I'm just being on that show and watching, the master work.
Yeah. So, as you can imagine, well, first up, it was for me, it was graduate film school. And I was very lucky, when we were sort of probably 2 days before shooting, when we're doing sort of our show and tell and showing him what we look like in our uniforms and how we handle the weapons and all that. I said, I hope you don't mind if when we're shooting, if I could just, kind of hang out and look over your shoulder. He's like, Eddie, whatever you want to do. Just, you're in this movie. You're welcome to, stay on set all day long if you want. So I took advantage of that and, used it as an opportunity to go to graduate film school. And it's funny, you mentioned before, showing up on the set of She's the One and the intimidation, and also working with actors. And I will say, on that film, and probably I did it on McMullen, I'm sure as well, I thought the role of the director was to be directing the actors all the time. So after a take, I'd say cut, and then I thought I had to have some notes. And I'd say, maybe try doing it this way, or try doing it that way, or could you give me some of this, or give me some of that? With Spielberg, we got a gang of us on that, an ensemble. There's some days where there's, 5 of us. And for almost 2 weeks, he calls action and cut, and that's it. And we do 3 takes and moving on. We start thinking, he hates us. He thinks we're terrible. And we're waiting for the new pages of the script to show up to discover that we're all going to die long before we find, Matt Damon.
Right.
And then finally we have a day where he's like, cut, Eddie, come on over here. Do me a favor. I need you to try and do this. And, Adam, to Adam Goldberg, I just kind of feel like you're rushing through this. Maybe slow it down. And so he gives us all these notes. And, at lunch that day, of course, we're all talking, why do you think he gave us the notes today? Mm-hmm. So at lunch, we go over and we talk to him. And he says, we ask him, and he said, well, today you didn't know what the hell you were doing. And he went on to explain. And he's like, look, I hire professionals. I assume that you have done your homework and that you show up in the morning prepared. So I'm not going to jump on you after your first take and sort of hurt your confidence by suddenly giving you a note. I assume it's going to take you 3 or 4 takes to find your way into it. Now, some actors can get it on the first take and slowly fall apart. But he's like, I got an ensemble here with some scenes where I got 5 guys, all talking. I sit back and I let you do it, and I'll let you figure it out. And, for 2 weeks you did until today.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
So today I stepped in, and that absolutely changed my approach with working. Next movie I made, Sidewalks of New York, and granted, I was, I worked with Stanley Tucci and Dennis Farina and, Rosario Dawson, which is, probably a second movie. But on that film, that's what I did. I was just like, I'm going to sit back and let them show me what they've prepared, and you work with someone like Stanley, the first take, he does it the way that it's scripted. The second take, he kind of plays with it a little bit. And then he sees that you're giving him room to play. And then he kind of really does his thing. And you're like, thank God I did not step in early and give him a note, because now he feels so comfortable and he's just giving me all of this great material. And that's the way I work. So I very rarely give any direction now, unless an actor is sort of taking it off into a direction that's completely wrong. The big one I do, because, I kind of do these talky New York movies, is speed up the pace. My New York actors kind of get the cadence of how I want the characters to speak. Sometimes other actors need to just speed it up a little bit. And
was that the biggest lesson you learned watching him direct?
That, and I guess the second one was, if something that he has pre-planned doesn't work, he doesn't beat the dead horse. Like we had a pretty complicated Steadicam shot where he's trying to link a bunch of us together. And he probably did it about 4 or 5 times. And I could tell him and Janusz, the DP, they just weren't happy with it. And, it's a big scene. There's squibs going off and stuff. And he's like, just give me a minute. And he kind of goes off and he takes, 5 or 10 minutes. And he's looking at the scene and he goes, okay, scratch what we did. I got a new way to shoot it. And we took a totally different approach into the scene. We did a scene with the dog tags where we shot it as scripted before lunch. And it was another one of those scenes where he's like, I don't like it. I'm not happy with it. Pulled us all together to lunch. He goes, guys, do me a favor, just improvise something here. I just want you to riff for 20 minutes. Go through the dog tags. And, the funny story is, in doing that, I read off a bunch of dog tags and I name a bunch of guys that I went to grammar school with. And they had, I forget what writer was on set that day, but they recorded the improv. And then from that, they rewrote that scene, and we shot sort of a new version of it after lunch. So the good thing was I got to plug all my buddies' names in the movie, and it's still there. Mike Cesario, Gary Iannico, and Vinny Rubino. Yeah. So they love that, right? To be in that.
Can you imagine? Like you're sitting in the room, you're sitting there going,
I didn't tell any of them. So they're sitting in the theater like, what the fuck? But anyhow, like that was a very valuable lesson too. Like, in your gut, and I'm sure you can speak to this as a filmmaker, mm-hmm. You have to trust your gut. Like, know when it doesn't work and when it's not funny, or it just, it feels whatever. Your gut is telling you that. And a lot of times you just, you're afraid to make that kind of change on set because what's at stake, right? It's money, it's time. And seeing Steven with a movie that big make those kind of changes. We did not have, we shot that movie. It was scheduled to shoot 66 days. We wrapped in 58. That's how efficient the filmmaker he is.
Jesus Christ, right? Man.
So, the other thing was, we shot all handheld, available light, sometimes 2 and 3 cameras going for a dialogue scene. So, the movie I make after that, Sidewalks of New York, not only did I steal the directing style, but that's how I came up with the pseudo-doc style. I was like, he's shooting this like an independent movie. We're banging through scenes here because the camera's on, the operator's shoulder. We're shooting available light. People are overlapping dialogue. I was like, all right, that's my next indie movie. I'm doing a pseudo-doc for that very reason.
Yeah, and I shot my last film in a pseudo-documentary. Yeah. And honestly, watching all of your DVDs, because you are so generous with your commentaries. Reading your book, which, by the way, if anyone has not read Independent Ed, you gotta. I read this thing front to cover before I made my first features, and I literally went out and bought every available DVD. If it had a commentary, I got the special edition McMullen, and she's the one I got. And that whole style of like just getting out and going to do it, like Newlyweds. I was just like, you know what, that I can do. I can go out and do that, because as filmmakers, you get like, especially if you are a professional filmmaker who's maybe done commercials, maybe worked in bigger budgets or worked in post. And there's kind of, you get up your own ass in a way, because you're like, oh, I need a Red. I need an Alexa. I can't make this movie for less than 7 million. Like, these are the kind of things that you tell yourself. And then when you bust out like Newlyweds, and you're like, wait a minute, I got that gear. I can go do this too. Like, screw it. Let's go out and build something. It was extremely inspirational, man. And that's one of the big things about your career that I followed over the years, man, is that you have no need to go back and make a $9,000 movie. You have no need to go make a $250,000 movie. You don't need to do that. You could have very comfortably kept acting, maybe get one movie every 4 or 5 years. That's 4 or 5 million or 6 million or something like that. Do some TV show. There's no need for you to go back and do indies, but you keep going back. And that's that respect for that indie. You never left the indie roots. You go and play in the big budget stuff, no question, but you come back, and that's like, there's no other, I can't think of many other filmmakers of your generation that does that. So, man, thank you for keep doing that and inspiring us.
Well, I mean, it goes back to it's fun, right? I just like, and you've done some bigger budget stuff, so you know what it can be like sometimes to deal with, and I have plenty of friends who work in the studio business, and they're great people and they're easy to work with, but it's a different process. In the book, I talk about sort of the times when Aaron and I will sit down and be like, okay, we got to make a movie this year. What do we want to do? We'll talk about our 2 lists of compromises. And the 2 lists of compromises we work off of are sort of, okay, if we're going to have to go ask someone for money, whether it's $1 million, $2 million, $10 million, there are certain compromises that are going to come with that money. A is they will fully expect to have a say in a lot of the decisions, starting with title of the movie, some notes on the script, who you're going to cast. If you're going to ask someone for $5 million or $10 million, whether it's a studio or some indie financing, they are absolutely going to give you a list of names that you need to cast from in order to get that money. The other thing is, when you do get one of those actors and you've got your $10 million, the good news is you're going to have a much easier time selling that movie. You've got a big, bold-faced name on your poster, which is going to excite the folks at Netflix or wherever, right? So that's one set of compromises. The other set of compromises are the ones where it's like, okay, we're going to make a movie for $25,000. And, here are the compromises we know we're going to have to make. We're not going to get a star. Okay? We're not going to get all the locations we want. We're going to have to be down and dirty. Odds are we're not going to make any money. Our fees are going to be sort of coming on the back end if the movie's successful. And we know it's going to be almost impossible to sell. So what do we want to do this year? Do we actually want to go make a movie, which is the $25,000 version? Or do we want to spend the next 2 to 3 years trying to get that big name just trying to get the money, then trying to get the actor, and then trying to get that movie up and running. And that is never a 6-month process. That is never a 12-month long process. That is several years of your life.
And that's the one thing I want people to understand, because a lot of people look at you and you're like, oh, it's Ed Burns. He could just call up a buddy of his that he's worked with and just like, hey, can you, Tom Hanks, can you come by and do my $25,000? And they just think that you can, because you're in the system and you've been in the system, you've had success, that you can just make things happen. And the more I talk to filmmakers in the space, Oscar winners, and it's the same story for all of them, other than Mr. Spielberg. And even then, he had to go to India to get money for Lincoln. Like, it still was a challenge for him. Filmmakers still have all the same problems, different levels, but still the same thing.
It just is never easy. And then look, if you're making a certain type of film, I don't want to say that that's easier, but you know, there are certain films that, that let's say are more obviously commercial. I was a kid when I'm in film school, I am not the guy who is falling in love with Star Wars and wanting to go make those kind of films. I did not love action films. I loved Last Picture Show and Tender Mercies and HUD, and I wanted to make, small little dramas, or I loved, films like The Graduate, The World According to Garp, and like I said, Truffaut, Woody Allen. I wanted to make, talky comedy dramas. There's, the marketplace for those films has all but disappeared. So, if I wanted to call Tom Hanks, I'd have a much easier time getting him if I had a sort of big budget idea movie as opposed to one of my talking little films.
Right. So packaging together a bigger movie would probably be a little easier for you, but yet there's still hurdles and things you're going to have to deal with. It's still scheduling
years, and a lot of your good friends, people you've worked with, who you've got a relationship with, it still takes, who are big movie stars, they still don't get back to you for 6 months. Especially when you're like, because you're trying to get them attached to raise your money.
Right. You're going through
like, hey, look, you got a $6 million offer here. Like, forget about Burns' script. All right, go to work.
Right, exactly. And then you still got to jump through those hoops, and there's scheduling issues, and there's agents. It's like, look, I know Eddie's doing his thing, but there's 6 million bones right here. Let's go. Yeah. Let's go. He's still trying to find his money. And that's the thing I want filmmakers to understand, that there is no magic key. There's no end of the rainbow, that we all still have to deal with that, even at the level that you're dealing with, and the kind of a success that you've had in your life, in your career. You're like, when you just said that, you're like, yeah, screws Burns' script. I got $6 million right here. Go with this. I seen those conversations. I've been part of those conversations in agents' rooms. Like, yeah, son of a, like, it's so hard. I mean, unless they're like your wife or your brother. And even then they're like, look, man, I love you and all, but I got $10 million to go do this other movie. Right?
Yeah. And look, plenty of actors will do it, but typically it is, their passion project.
Right.
When they're going to go cut their fee to go do something, a lot of times, and, as well they should, it's like, they don't necessarily want to help you make your passion project. They've got that script they've been sitting on for years, and they're slowly putting it together and trying to get the financing together. So
it's something that you talk about in your book, which is Brothers McMullen 2.0. Can you break down what Brothers McMullen 2.0 is? Because it's something that I used extensively in my last 2 features.
Okay. So, I'll back up a little bit because it's kind of interesting how my career kind of has panned out, right? So for my first 4 films, it's McMullen, She's the One, a movie called No Looking Back, which really didn't do well, and Sidewalks of New York. They all did, pretty well. And I credit that to the fact that I'm still a kid, a screenwriter, who believed in outlining before he wrote his scripts. I still am a student of the game. I am not so arrogant to think that I don't need to go back and kind of, play within a 3-act structure and really kind of have an outline that's airtight before I sit down to write, right? After that, I decide, for whatever reason, whether it's laziness or arrogance, I stop outlining. And then I make 4 movies. And these are the 4 you probably never heard of, or maybe you have, most people would. Ash Wednesday, Looking for Kitty, The Groomsman, and Purple Violets, right? All 4 movies get terrible reviews. All 4 movies don't work at the box office. And then after that, I am in director's jail. Like I have my next script, and for about 2 years, I can't get it financed. I'm having a very tough time getting actors attached. You know, at first we were looking for 8 million, then 6, then 4, then 2, then we're down to like 1.2. And Aaron and I have a meeting in the Hollywood Hills at some guy's house. And again, you know, you joke about the guy with the cigar sticking out of the side of his mouth. Oh, no. Like one of those deals. And still, they're kind of telling me how I need to make this movie. And Aaron and I go back to the hotel I'm staying in LA, and we have a drink at the bar. And I'm like, Ruben, it's over, man. Like, how did this happen? Like, you know, it wasn't that long ago. I was the guy who made Brothers McMullen, and now we're up here, and this guy's telling us we got to rewrite the script based on his notes for $1 million. I said, it's over, man. We are in director's jail. Wow. And over those beers, we're kind of joked around like, how is it that when I was 24, I was able to write the Brothers McMullen, and with no connections and no money, and I didn't know how to make movies, I was able to make a movie that was, you know, still to this day, my most financially successful film. I was like, or then he was like, well, why don't we just do that again? So there on the napkin at the bar, we came up with McMullen 2.0, which was basically the rules were how we made McMullen, and we wouldn't divert from that. So $25,000 to get it in the can, 12 days of shooting, 3-man crew, all unknown actors. All actors had to bring their own wardrobe, had to do their own hair and makeup, and every location we had to get for free. All right. So that was basically, those were the rules. And the next day we sat down and we started, and we said, and we have to do an outline.
So you learned a little bit of those last 4 movies.
Yeah. And you know, we both loved The Graduate. And you know, I remember we were talking about the movie Sideways, which we both loved. And we're like, all right, it'll be 2 guys. Let's just start with 2 guys. And we just started riffing, and over time it turned into a kid and his uncle instead of 2 best friends. But you know, and that's why I think for people, like if they don't know what to write, or they kind of have an idea, but they need, you know, sometimes it's okay to go look at one of your favorite films and almost start to tell your story within the framework of their story, right? Like you could look at, you know, I know, let's say on Brothers McMullen, at a certain point when I was hitting the wall, I looked at Hannah and her sisters, and I was like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing here. He's kind of weaving those 3 stories together, and then they come together. It seems to be every 15 pages in the script. All right, so I got to cut and paste this scene and move it there. So that's a very valuable tool, I think, if you're a young screenwriter, because, you know, even if you rip off the structure of your favorite film for your first draft, you should do, you know, 20, 25 drafts of your script. By the time you do those 25 drafts, you know, it would be unrecognizable if you're playing with some structure stuff. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, what was I talking? 2.0. So that's what we did. We just started outlining, and you know, script maybe in 6 months, and then said, let's go do it. And then
was the first one on 2.0? Was that Nice Guy Johnny?
That was Nice Guy Johnny. Yeah.
And that was $25,000. And then that did well, right? That did
well. Well, we knew, you know, the other thing that happened was the movie that I spoke about that didn't do well, Purple Violets.
Right.
That was a movie, was actually okay, that movie. We couldn't get, we were offered a couple of distribution offers, but again, like your book talks about, it was really bad deals. You know, there was no chance that our investor was going to get any of her money back if we went with that. And it would be your typical New York, LA, one screen. If we do decent, maybe they'll give us a few other markets, but we could see the writing on the wall. At that time, iTunes had just launched, they had the music for a couple of years, but they just launched the movie sort of page of it. And I was starting to watch a lot of movies on iTunes. So I was like, all right, why don't we go to iTunes and maybe they'll release us as their first all exclusive feature film. And because it was basically a new bit of business of theirs, they said yes. So Purple Violets was the first movie ever released exclusively on iTunes.
For transactional. For
a transaction, yeah. And it did great. It didn't make its money back, but like we saw what those numbers were, and we're like, okay, so if we make a movie for $25,000, all in $125 with post.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Based on what Purple Violets did, we know we're going to, we're going to make some real money here. So that was the plan, and it did.
So for everyone listening, though, what year was this?
This is 2009, so 2010 is when it comes out.
Okay, so that's 10. It does not exist anymore. So everyone listening, like, I'm going to do what Ed Burns did. I'm like, nope. TVOD for independent films is essentially dead unless you can drive traffic. The finding you on iTunes thing is gone.
Even at that time, think about it. We're basically, we have an aggregator distributing that title, but because we're really the first one sort of embracing iTunes, we're getting a banner on the landing page. Like when you go to iTunes, it was like Nice Guy Johnny. We ended up being the number 4th most rented title for one of the months that it was out, which was unheard of.
So Nice Guy Johnny did very well then.
Yeah, Nice Guy Johnny did very well. Yeah,
right. And then
did as well.
And right, and then you did a movie called Newlyweds, which was 9,000, which was, when I saw that, I was just like, wow, this is it's in apartments, it's on the street, he's stealing all the locations, it's just like, yes, yes, and that one did extremely well as well, right?
Yeah.
So
that's we knew when we finished Johnny, we had a blast doing it, and then we turned it around real quickly, and we saw that it was working. I had just read an article about people who were shooting commercials on the 5D. So literally that day, I jump on the train. I go up to B&H on 34th Street. I buy the 5D. I call my DP, Will. I said, look, I just bought this 5D. I saw this thing. Why don't we shoot a scene tomorrow to see if this thing works?
Right.
So I had kind of an idea of something I wanted to do. I quickly wrote a scene. I called my buddy who owns a gym. I was like, we need to come over to your gym. I'll be there for an hour. And I said, like, I'll play this personal trainer and we'll shoot one half of the phone conversation as just a camera test. And that scene is in the movie.
Of course it is. You never waste not.
Yeah. So, and we dumped it into, my desktop computer after we shot. And like, look at that. Holy crap. That looks good. Okay, let's do it. So I just started writing then.
And with, when you picked up my book and you kind of found me, you were looking for distribution help and self-distribution help. What has stopped? Have you gone down the self-distribution route just yet? Because there's a couple movies that I've, Summertime and Beneath the Blue Suburban Skies, that are, to my knowledge, I can't find them. They haven't been released yet. What are you doing with self-distribution? Have you tried self-distribution? Because I think you would be an amazing candidate for it.
Yes, I'll tell you. So Summertime, we actually did finally sell. And we're in the process of closing that deal. So I don't want to talk about it just yet.
Fair enough.
But Beneath the Blue Suburban Skies is one of my favorite films that I've made. Jennifer Ely plays the lead. I mean, she is so terrific. We shot, we shot on the red. We shot in color, but we knew we were going to turn it into black and white. So Will lit it according for that. So it's in black and white. A couple of years ago, I became obsessed with Ozu, a Japanese filmmaker from the 50s and 60s. At another time, we'll talk about that film because we had shot the entire film on a 40. We used one lens. The camera never moves for the entire film until the very last shot of the movie.
Right.
Every shot is a still photograph. Yeah, I mean, a real interesting exercise in sort of discipline. Again, I fell in love with his style and did all this research. I was like, kind of like with the 5D, I was like, I want to try this. This is kind of an interesting way to make an indie movie. So that movie went to Toronto. We got one of the best reviews I've ever got. COVID hit, and so it's just been sitting on the shelf. But that is the movie that we were thinking, do we try some form of self-distribution?
But what's the budget?
I don't want to talk about the budget. I'll tell you.
Of course. No. Yeah, okay. No, I don't want to tell you what the budget is, but I'm assuming it's under $10 million. Let's just call it that.
Yes.
it's an under 10. I always tell people it's under $10 million bucks. It's
my $35 million black and white sad drama where the camera doesn't move.
Right. That sounds very
really happy with me.
I think financially, that's a smart move. I'm just saying.
Someone's going to lose some money.
It's shrewd. I'm just saying. Okay. We'll talk later about that. Now, you also, dude, you worked on a great show called Mob City for another master, Frank Darabont. Man, is there anything you learned from him as far as storytelling? Because everybody knows on the show, I'm obsessed with Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile for that matter. It's my remote throwaway movie. If it's on, done. Just keep going down that road. You worked with him obviously closely in the film, on the show. What did you learn any lessons that you can share?
That's interesting. I loved Frank, loved working with him. He's a great guy. His style is so different from what I do and how I learned how to make movies. Like we were talking before, like I only know from not having enough money and having to compromise and learning how to pivot and be like, oh, you mean we can't have that location? Okay, we'll shoot it on the street corner. Or that actor's not available. Let's quickly rewrite. Frank does not work that way. So I think what I learned from him is, he fights for his vision. If I have a weakness, I'm sure I have a number of weaknesses as a filmmaker, but one of the big ones is I'm not willing to fight for certain things because I know there's an alternate way to do it. And there are times where I look back and think like, you know what, I should have actually fought for that one. Maybe that's why the movie didn't turn out so good. Maybe you don't always have to pivot. Frank never pivots. He has a vision in his head, and come hell or high water, he is going to make that happen. And again, I then, from that experience, a guy named Michael Wright ran TNT at the time. I meet Michael on the set of that, and that's how I end up making my show for TNT, Public Morals. Mm-hmm. And then Michael now runs Epics, which is how I ended up making Bridge and Tunnel for Epics. Yeah,
so Public Morals was your first introduction basically to being a creator of a show. And you wrote the show, you act in the show, you direct. Did you direct? You didn't direct all the episodes, right?
Yeah, I wrote and directed all the episodes.
So you wrote and Jesus Christ, man, that's a hell of a schedule to do as a TV guy. Like you're writing. You said there is no writer's room. You're the writer, you're the director, and you're the actor in television. That's obscene. It's an obscene amount.
But I wrote everything beforehand, like I did with.
You're not writing as you're shooting, obviously, but still, it's still a tremendous amount of work, and it's gorgeous. I saw parts of that show when it came out, and it was gorgeous, man. It's beautifully shot. It was so much fun.
We suddenly had money. We're so used to making things on these lower budgets.
Right.
TV budgets are significant. And, Will and I were just in all of our glory. It was like, oh boy, we finally get to play with the camera.
We got some toys.
Capturing an image, all the toys. So it was a blast.
And now your new show, Bridge and Tunnel, how did that come to be? And I know did you shoot this during COVID, right?
Not during COVID, yeah.
So how did that come to be?
So I had dinner with Michael Wright a couple of years ago. He had probably just taken over Epics, and he was looking for, a half-hour escape from the toxic news cycle, and from a lot of the great shows that are on television can be pretty dark and depressing. So he's like, look, we need something half-hour, put a smile on your face, something nostalgic, something period. Could you give me something that's sort of totally like Brothers McMullen, only about a group of guys like a diner. And I said, okay, I like that idea, but maybe instead of 6 guys, why don't I make it 3 guys and 3 girls? And then I kind of, I mentioned before, The Graduate's one of my favorite films, and always had an idea for a film. I didn't think it would be a TV show about, a bunch of kids the day after college graduation. And you come home, you're back in your parents' house. You have to get reacclimated to living at home after being gone for 4 years, reacclimated to, all of your friends who are also home. And, how does that pecking order reestablish itself? A lot of times people talk about like that night at the bar before Thanksgiving, everyone comes together and it's like the old order kind of reestablishes itself. Mm-hmm. But I was also very interested, like the time period in New York that I've always been obsessed with. And of course, you're never obsessed with, your era. Mine was the late 70s, early 80s in New York. You got the birth of punk and hip hop and new wave and the art scene and the fashion scene and the
rap,
city.
Hip hop, yeah.
So I was thinking like that would have been the time to live in. So in a weird way, that's another one where I kind of re-engineered the story to think about where these kids would be in 3 years as they were in that world. And then kind of took them back 3 years to be like, so season 1 is sort of establishing the kid Jimmy, who I'm going to have end up as a photographer in the fashion world. He's a kid who's, just returned from school and he's a photographer. Jill, his girlfriend, is going to end up in the fashion world, and she's just graduated from FIT, studying design. So that was sort of where the ideas came from. And we were supposed to be 8 episodes. I wrote 8 scripts, and then COVID hits, or I'm writing kind of leading up to COVID, and it comes to the point where it's like they're going to pull the plug on the show if production doesn't open up again. Production opens up, and we have all the COVID protocols, and we lose basically 1/5 of our budget to the COVID protocols. Testing 3 times a week, additional, sort of nurses on set, shorter days, trying to pull as many of your interior scenes to be exterior scenes. And then we find out that the city is not issuing film permits, and half the show takes place in Manhattan. So then I have to go back I got to turn 8 episodes into 6 and cut out probably 1/5 of the cast and make all these stories work in these characters' backyards and front stoops and in the local bar. And in an odd, talk about pivoting and being able to do that.
Right.
In an odd way, it turned it into a different show. But I think, for season 1, it's a better show because I didn't have all the, let's say, the bigger incident that Manhattan and their lives in Manhattan would have given me. So I really had to go in and be like, okay, this has to be a character study now. Right. So it's going to be a little slower, but I got to be able to make these scenes work. If you got 3 guys sitting on their front stoop talking about their love lives, I was like, well, kind of sounds like Brothers McMullen. I think.
But it seems like you were. But it seems like you have been your entire career has been building up to that moment, because you are so used to not doing things and pivoting and not doing things with money and pivoting and having to shift things around. Someone who might have only been able to play in $100 million budgets would say, well, that's the end of that. But you were able to adjust and pivot and move. So all those tools you've put in your toolbox over your career helped you on a show, a network show still.
The other thing was I'm talking to all my friends who are my department heads, and everyone was feeling like I was feeling like we want to go back to work, right. And I was like, if Epix is willing to do this, then I will figure out a way to do it, because we all just needed to get out of the house and get on set and shoot. And jobs
for people too.
And jobs for people. So it really was, it was just a blessing. And my cast, these great young kids who were they had a blast together, but they were so responsible. We got through the whole thing without anyone getting sick. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. So what's up next for you, man? What are you doing next?
I think we're looking good for season 2. So I think that's what I'm going to start writing. And now it looks like hopefully we'll be able to take these characters into Manhattan, pick it up a year later. It'll be July of 1981. So, the band will be at CBGB's and the kids will be dancing in the nightclubs, and it'll be fun.
Dude, I was raised in New York, so I'm a New Yorker originally. So,
where are you from?
Queens, Jamaica, Queens.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So I was raised in New York, and then I finished off in Florida, and then out here. But I was from New York until 85. So from 76, let's say 76 to 85, and I was born in Florida. But that time period, I remember New York. My dad was a cabbie, and he took me in. Dude, the days he would take me, I was sitting in the front, and the stuff I saw as running through Manhattan, and I remember breakdancing would hit and all of that kind of stuff. It's hard for people to understand what it was like late 70s, early 80s to be in New York, man. I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to seeing that show now. I really want to.
You'll dig it, and the soundtrack is incredible.
I'm sure. Yeah.
You'll have a good time with it.
Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. Okay. If you could go back in time and tell your younger self one thing, what would that be?
All right. You know what? The advice I would give myself is no one is keeping score. Don't sweat your failures so much. Don't be overly precious about every little decision. There were some opportunities maybe I could have had that I was overthinking it and thinking, this isn't the right movie for this time, even though I kind of loved the script and what I was doing and wanted to do it. So, again, looking back on 26 years later, who cares? Nobody cares if you had, these successes and these failures. Like it so doesn't matter. So I've been able to, pretty much make a lot of movies over that time. But I kind of look at those chunks in my career where I didn't. Mm-hmm. And it's because I was so hung up on it's got to be the right next thing.
And isn't it just like filmmakers to think that everyone's watching us and everything that we do is so important? And it's just a thing that, I do it. Every filmmaker does it. And you're right. It'll stop you. It'll paralyze you. It'll paralyze you. Great advice. Now, what advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break in today?
Well, look, we kind of talked about it earlier. I would say, don't listen to the naysayers. You absolutely should pick up the camera and go make that movie. Mm-hmm. You can do it now at such a low budget that if it's terrible, kind of like all of the terrible screenplays I wrote, you don't need to share it with anyone. Like the songwriter who's got, tapes filled with all of the half-finished terrible songs, you don't have to let anyone listen to them. So go make the movie, learn from your mistakes. That's the great advantage I think filmmakers have now, is they can have a process where you're learning, in the way that a poet, a novelist, a painter, a songwriter can. That was never a freedom afforded to filmmakers before the last 5 years. So filmmakers can go out and make short films. They can make low-budget features that don't sort of bankrupt them. So that's what I would say.
And what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
I think it's sort of like, don't be so arrogant to think you can't continually learn. Like I now, and look, quite honestly, not to blow smoke up your ass, but that's how I discovered your podcast. Right. I'm trying to figure out what don't I know about the indie film biz as far as how to self-distribute a film, and that's how I discovered you. I'm constantly picking up new books on screenwriting. And there's someone who's written a book, and now I've become obsessed with those master classes. So, and the other thing is, I've listened to all of them, and I would say for every, there's certain filmmakers and screenwriters who are telling you, no, it's got to be done this way. Don't do that. You have to show. Don't show. You take from those the things that that might work for you, but there is no one set of rules. Mm-hmm. do this, fortunately. Otherwise, you and I are both not here.
Right.
So, but that would be the thing I'd say. Just you should always remain a student of the game. You can watch that first timer's film and see something in that you never would have thought of, where you're like, oh, you know what? I never would have thought to attack that scene from that angle. That's something interesting. I bring up Ozu. I hadn't even heard of him. We didn't study him in film school for whatever reason. I was listening to another podcast, and Brian De Palma was on, and he had written a book about transcendental
meditation. Yeah. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
But filmmaking.
Right.
Storytelling. I forget the name of the book, but he made that movie last year or 2 years ago with Ethan Hawke about the priest.
Right. Yeah.
I'm doing press for that film. So I bought the book. I read that. That turns me on to Ozu. I go deep on Ozu. I watch everything he's got. And then I'm like, oh, there's a new style of filmmaking I've just discovered. And, this filmmaker was making his movies in the 50s. So and it changed my approach to a film. So,
and 3 of your favorite films of all time.
I mentioned my Texas trilogy, hands down. I go to them all the time. Tender Mercies with Robert Duvall, Bogdanovich's Picture Show, Paul Newman's HUD. 2 of them were written by Larry McMurtry, who's one of my favorite novelists. So those are my 3 big ones. And then, I'm a New York guy, and I love gangster films. So Godfather 1 and 2 and Goodfellas. That's my holy trinity of of just badass, the best there is of the gangster genre.
Brother, man, I really do appreciate you coming on the show, man. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor talking to you, man. And thank you for the years of inspiration to us indie filmmakers out here trying to hustle it out and trying to make it happen, man. You have been a great inspiration since you came out with Brothers McMullen, and you've continued to feed the community with your books and your commentaries and everything else. So thank you again, man. I really appreciate it, brother.
Awesome. And thank you, man. And I do mean it. And anyone out there listening, go to the backlog of these podcasts. They are filled with great information to help you on your way.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I want to thank Ed for coming on the show and dropping his knowledge bombs on the tribe. I also want to thank Ed for his inspiration over the years for independent filmmakers around the world. If you want to get links to anything we spoke about in this episode, including links to all of those amazing DVDs with director commentary, as well as his amazing book, Independent Ed, head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/126. And if you haven't already, please head over to screenwritingpodcast.com, subscribe, and leave a good review for the show. It truly helps us out a lot. Thank you again so much for listening, guys. As always, keep on writing, no matter what.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.